All right, good morning, everyone. We are glad to see you here this morning for our last coffee chat of the school year. Today, we are going to be doing part 2 of our case manager closeout, and we'll be talking specifically about determining end of year student progress so that you can make informed decisions for next year. So, in case you are not familiar with us, we are part of the Diverse Learners Cooperative. I'm here with my colleague Justine this morning. And as an organization, we are a nonprofit who strives to connect teachers and leaders with the professional learning, resources, and networks that they need to not only improve outcomes for the diverse learners that they serve, but to increase teacher and leader retention so that they feel more equipped in the classroom. So, like I said, today we are going to do part 2 of our case manager closeout. And specifically, what we're going to talk about is a way to approach systematically end of year IEP data collection, along with giving you a protocol for analyzing and reflecting upon this information. So, we're going to talk about why it's important to collect this data at the end of the year, what this collection method can look like, as well as show you a data analysis protocol that we have created that you can use. And so you can determine your next action steps when collecting this data and reviewing it at the end of the school year. So let's talk about why it's important to determine student progress. Overall, we want to make sure that we set aside time to do this process because it helps us to do two things, both look back and look forward. We can analyze student progress and data at the end of the year in order to reflect on the instructional practices that we use this school year to determine whether or not they were effective. We can also look forward and make sure that we're providing a comprehensive big picture of where students are in their learning for next year's case manager. This is especially important if you will not have the same students on your caseload next year, because you want to pass on the valuable information and learnings that you've gained from working with your students so that next year's case manager is set up for success and can hit the ground running in the fall. When we talk about data collection, there are a couple of ways that you can do it. First, you have to determine which data you're going to collect. So this could look like IEP goal-specific data from their annual IEPs. Now, the key thing to keep in mind here is that just because it's the end of the school year does not mean it's the end of a child's annual IEP cycle. An IEP does not necessarily line up with the school year calendar because it can start at any point in the school year and runs for a full year again until that point. So make sure you are considering how far along a student is in that annual IEP cycle relative to the end of the year as you're thinking about the progress they've made towards their goals. For EL students, if you have students who are multilingual learners or you're serving EL students as an EL case manager, you might instead look at access report data. We took the access test back in early February and March, and so this data might be becoming available to you towards the end of the year and could be really helpful in determining how much progress students have made across language domains so that you can figure out how to support them better next year. The other kind of data that you can collect and look at is end of year summative data. So whether this is MAP testing, state testing, end of course assessments, all of this data deserves a thorough analysis and reflection because it can give us key insights into how students are accessing other parts of their core curriculum. We can also focus, while looking at this data, we do want to focus on progress towards IEP goals and make sure that our IEP goals are setting up our students to access that curriculum as they move forward and on to the next grade level. Once you have figured out which type of data you're going to collect, you then need to figure out the tool that you're going to use to collect it. You want to remain consistent with whatever you've used throughout the year. So this might be using paper and pencil data. If you've done that, you want to make sure you have all the materials that you have used and ready to go for this upcoming end of year data cycle. But you also want to make sure that you have the past records so that you can analyze everything from the beginning of the year to the end. This might also take the shape of a Google form. We've linked one here and we can show it to you at the end of this presentation, but this one categorizes student data goals by subject. It is editable, so when you click on it, it'll ask you to make a copy and you'll have your own version that you can use for your students. If you need tips on how to create your own Google form, we've linked those here as well. Lastly, you might be using an online program provided by your school or district. This may provide the data or the graphs for you already, so this could be a helpful place to continue collecting your data at the end of the year before participating in the reflection process. And then finally, you want to determine the logistics. So the biggest question is who? Who is going to be collecting this data? If it's not going to be you as the special education case manager or as the EL case manager, who might be assisting you with collecting this data, and do they need training to be able to administer these assessments? For example, if you are leveraging the support of paraprofessionals or other classroom aides, you might need to show them how to collect the data before you ask them to help you with this process. You also want to think about when. Hopefully throughout the year, you have had a consistent, somewhat schedule of collecting progress monitoring data. And so we want to make sure that we are fitting this end of year data collection in as well. But we do know that schedules at the end of the year can be a little bit tricky, especially again with end of course assessments, state testing, and even fun events at school. So making sure that you have adequate time for each of your students to be able to collect the data that you need will be important as part of this process. And the last thing you do is you need to make sure what needs to be communicated ahead of time. So do you need to communicate schedule logistics to general education teachers or administrators? Do you need to communicate any information to families or students themselves about what kind of data you'll be collecting and how it will be shared? So these are just some of the logistics that you want to think through as you prepare to collect all of your end of year data. So now I'm going to pass it over to Justine, and she's going to walk us through our data analysis protocol.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so when we're talking about a data analysis protocol, we're really talking about a three-part process. And so after you've done the great data collection that Mary highlighted for us, you're going to want to start by summarizing that data. And you're going to want to think about where you're going to be summarizing that data. And we're going to later offer a tool that you might want to use with your students for this summary. Next, you're going to want to make sure that you're reflecting on that data. So you want to think back on the data you've collected. What trends do you notice with individual students or perhaps across students that are noteworthy? Finally, you're going to want to communicate this information to key stakeholders, and you're going to want to make sure that you dedicate time and a clear method to do so. So as I said, we're going to share with you guys today an end of year IEP reflection tool that you can make a copy of. You have the link for it, and it can help guide this process. So on this first page, this is an example of this IEP and end of year IEP reflection tool. And this is a sample student that's offered on the first sheet of this tool. And so what you'll notice with this is that you're first going to be summarizing information. So in the far left column, you're going to see that goals were written. So in this sample student, the case manager listed the IEP goals in this column. So you'll see there's some language art goals, some math goals, and some pre-vocational goals. Next, similarly to what you will do as an IEP case manager, you'll be doing your quarterly progress reports. And so what you're going to do is for each goal, you're going to mark what the progress was toward the goal that aligns with how you completed your progress reports. And so we have a little criteria here for you to follow as you're completing this. You'll mark for each goal. If the goal was met, it just means the goal was achieved. If the student has shown sufficient progress, it means that there's been some progress toward that goal. And if the student is showing insufficient progress, it means that there's been no progress or perhaps a decline in progress. And so this case manager and the sample student went through and completed that in that column for each aligned goal. And so what's really nice about this tool is that as you do that, it will auto-populate with a nice pie chart that summarizes all that information. And so it gives you a great visual to help understand the broader context of the goals and what progress your student made towards these goals. So following the summary, you're going to be doing some reflection on each individual student. And so in this sample, what you see is that we have some reflection questions and then a space for you to actually type your responses into it. And so the first three questions are just kind of summary questions. You know, what percentage of the goals were met? What percentage of goals demonstrated sufficient progress, or what percentage demonstrated insufficient progress? In question 4, the teacher is actually going to talk about some teacher actions that led to the goals that have been achieved or goals with sufficient progress. And so in this example, the student showed some progress on their reading goals, and they were receiving some reading pullout. And so that's what the teacher thinks that led to that progress. The student also made significant progress on their pre-voc goals, which was facilitated by practice at a lunch bunch on Friday. And so in the 5th question, the teacher must reflect on the question of what teacher actions led to goals with insufficient progress. And so the teacher wrote here, the student didn't show much progress in math. Currently, the student is receiving inclusion 2 times per week for 50 minutes in the general ed class. She has made some progress on grade level standards, but not as much progress on IEP goals. And so in the 6th question, there's a space for just any additional reflections. And so the teacher wrote, I need to make sure that whoever is the case manager next year is monitoring math growth for early next school year. If the student doesn't show adequate growth, I might consider an IEP addendum to increase minutes. And I want to make sure that we're continuing with the reading pullout for reading goals, perhaps sticking with that same curriculum or an extension of that curriculum. And lunch bunch was really great. Want to keep that for pre-vote goals. So that's the type of reflection that would be done on each individual student. After you're done with that individual student reflection, you also want to think across students. So this last sheet of the template provides some reflection questions and some space for reflection responses that really have to do more with trends you're noticing across students. So for example, asking questions like, did you notice any trends that supported student growth? Any trends that maybe adversely impacted student achievement? What about this data reflection are you proud of? It's important to celebrate, what we're proud of with our data. Any shifts to your practice that you think are important to implement for next school year to improve outcomes? And do you need any support making these shifts happen? And so after you've done that reflection in individual students and across students, you want to make sure you're right? So the first person to make sure you're communicating it to is to next year's case manager. So, sharing this template or, printing it and providing it for them is really key so that they can know a little bit about where that student left off at the end of the school year. Next, you're going to want to think about sharing it with students and families, of course. They're integral to making sure that they understand, what progress was made this year. And finally, you're going to want to think about if any of these trends that you noticed require some sort of programmatic or big picture type of shift, you might want to be communicating it with your school leadership, whether that be actually, your principal or perhaps maybe your director of student supports that could help implement these shifts. Okay, and so after you've done all this, with all of this we've gone over today, I just want to kind of summarize what our action steps are following this presentation. So first, you just really want to make sure that you have some time for data collection. And so, it's the end of the school year. It's really crazy right now. So just making sure you actually dedicate some time for it. You also want to make sure there's time to reflect and then time to communicate these reflections to key stakeholders. And then, of course, reflecting is great, but the most important thing is actually acting on these reflections and making some shifts to your practice that fall in line with those reflections that you've come up with. And so if you do these things, I think that it will lead to both improved outcomes for your students and a more informed team. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, Mary, do you want to highlight some of the things we've got going on this summer?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justine. So this is our last coffee chat of the school year. We will be offering some other opportunities and ways to engage. So we do want to make sure that you are on our email list. So make sure that you sign up for that on our website. We will have some summer intensives as well as opportunities for leaders to collaborate, especially around specific topics such as the RTI Impact Network. So if you have any questions about any of these opportunities, please feel free to email brooke@diverselearnerscoop.com or visit our website or social media pages for additional information. So we will go ahead now that we have wrapped up and we will take some time for questions. Done.